market after March of 2020, you've come into a situation where we've looked at this, and in 2020, everything shut down except for short-term rentals. So we didn't have hotels, we didn't have cruises, flights were restricted. Everybody wanted to get out of the house. So short-term rentals, there was an abundance of demand, and it was all pent up into one vertical, right? So we saw you couldn't get ADR high enough. Occupancy, no matter what, everything got rented. Record inventory got added to the pool, but it also got a lot of attention for us. So there was additional regulatory activity. And so what we saw last year and what we're going to see kind of going forward is that we're kind of building off of 2019, where technology is continuing to grow. We're still seeing a lot of outside investment and continuous innovation. So building off of 2019, going into the future right now, you're going to see there's a lot of other competition for our guest demand with hotels and cruises and international flights, but also a lot more inventory than we had on the market before, right? So this is going to be a really interesting situation where people are much more aware of fees, they're much more aware of rates, and kind of that the things that got us here are not going to serve us quite as well moving forward. And it's important to really assess your business and understand what's going on and how it applies to you and how to make adjustments. These are the terms that everybody should know. It's the terms that we all use across different markets to talk about the same thing, right? And so this is what we want to talk about of every day. How do you measure how your properties are doing compared to the market? How are your properties doing compared to what your goals are for them, right? So we have adjusted paid occupancy. Anytime we talk about occupancy, we're going to talk about adjusted paid occupancy. And so this is how many nights of the nights that the property is available are booked, right? We want to make sure that we're driving occupancy in order to drive total revenue, right? Then there's ADR, which everybody talks about, average daily rate. How much are you pricing your property on every individual night? And then we've got revenue per available units, or the other kind of term that is used around here is revenue per available rental unit. And this RevPAR is the combined measurement of the ADR and the occupancy. This says how well were you able to adjust the levers of occupancy and ADR to maximize the value of each night. So these are terms that you just kind of want to work through. Then we're going to look at regional markets. So pay attention to the colors on this map and which one applies to you here, because as we go through the next round of slides, you're going to kind of be able to see what is your market, what does that look like, and how is it adjusting compared to the market.
I'm going to take a few more minutes on this first slide. So this is based off of our data across Inhabit, as well as some pulled from LSI Insights. This is what we see of the market going on. A lot of our data slides are going to be formatted similar in this nature. So we've got a map in the lower left here that's going to show you where. So if we break out some different regions, you'll see those down there. With those metrics that Amber mentioned and inventory, we kind of let you see where those are going as a trend. We didn't get in the numbers here, but you can see, we're seeing inventory is up for the US. The average daily rate seemed to stay pretty much flat. The revenue per, the RevPAR and the occupancy, both were down. What we're going to do is look a little bit about where that's at, some of the stats. You can kind of see some differences and some trends and everything else that we have going on. So in this chart here, we're looking at both occupancy and our average daily rate. So these solid lines represent what we did in 2023. And the dash lines represent what was in 2022. Blue is the occupancy. The orange is the average daily rate. I'm going to start with average daily rate. You can see that in 2022, going through here, we were right around $400, $350, $400. Previous year was a little bit less. Then for a couple months in the spring, we went for all US combined a little bit less than the previous year. And then surprisingly, for those summer months, it held almost exactly where it was in the previous year. And then through the end of the year, you can see we started to go a little bit priced less than the previous year. And I'll mention that back here in a second on this chart. The big discrepancy now you see here is in the occupancy. So you can see as we went through the year, we hit some gaps where it was almost 20% difference from the previous year in occupancy. It did, as the rate started to drop a little bit later in the year, you do see that somewhat tighten up a little bit there. So that's, two interesting stats. Obviously, you can control your rates. You have to convince people to book. The rates is one of the things you do to that, as well as other things we'll talk about throughout this. So if I go ahead to the next now, and I'm going to look at the same data or the same region, but I'm going to look at the revenue per unit. Again, you can see this is how much money on average each unit was getting in each of these months. So like in July, on average, units were getting across the US about $8,000. Previous year was $10,000. That was down. It was down through the whole year. You can see some regions where maybe it pulled back in, and that may seem somewhat alarming. The next slide helps to kind of correlate that together. Now we're looking at the number of units per property management. So each of you in your company, on average, a property management company went from 60 units to like 75 or something like, in depending on the month. So they were seeing a 15 to 25% increase from 2022 to 2023. Now that's in the overall market. So not that each company grew that. That could be new people coming into rentals. That could be new construction, different things like that. That influx of inventory really is what kind of drove the occupancy down and the revenue per unit down. A lot of clients really ended up seeing the same amount of revenue in the year. It's just they had more units, or they had added units, and their bookings either moved to other units. So their occupancy as a whole went down, but they still had the same amount of revenue. I say all that, it's important to not get hung up on any specific stat or number and feel like, oh, we did great or oh, we did bad. It's accumulation of a lot of things. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, it's how much money you made. But short of advertising everybody's revenue of every company across the industry, you have to look at these stats and make some assumptions. So, Amber, Scott, anything more before I kind of dive into some of the regions to add to that?
I would say this inventory per property manager, I think that even underestimates the count. If you look at probably only 50 to 75% of all of the rental units in the US are professionally managed. So the inventory increasing really blew up a lot of markets last year and really changed the occupancy game for people.
There is that outside factor that's not professionally managed of people
Mhm.
that, oh, Barry's making money off of this. I should rent my basement out, or I should rent this house out. And they're doing it themselves. And that does impact you when there's a lot of it. And there was a lot of it. So, um, okay. So moving in now, Amber had mentioned with the map, pay attention to the different colors. We've got the map here in the lower left. This is the same stats. We're just looking at occupancy here because it was too much to put both occupancy and average daily rate on the same chart. Again, the solid line is 2023. Instead of a dashed line and making this really messy, we just have dots representing 2022. So I'm going to use, for example here, if I look at the Southeast, and they're in red. You can kind of go through the different months with January and see the red's up a little bit from it. You can see the different gaps as you go along through the timeline. So whatever region you're in, you can look at that. The big point here is not to specifically show your region, was to show that all regions did have that occupancy drop. They were at different degrees at different times based on either seasonality or just how that market, or how that region was performing in general. Or potentially other factors of storms and fires and other stuff like that. So this one here will let you can see that discrepancy in occupancy to back up what we were seeing nationwide. You just start to drill down a little bit more. We can look at the same type of thing with the average daily rate. Again here, the US wise, everything was pretty much the same as last year. Now you can see a little bit more with the different markets and see where their pricing went. And, you can kind of glance at a few here, and like I'm looking at the purple line, which is the mountain ones, and you can see they were a little bit under, and we're going to see that on another graph down the road. Or the red with the Southeast, they were a little bit above. And, the lighter blue with the Northeast, they actually, in the earlier of the year, they were under, and then later in the year, they went up and then back under. So they were kind of each side. And there's a lot of theories to that, whether it's things getting back to pre-COVID levels or seasonality or storms. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into that, specifically each one. but nothing stood out here as a major aberration or change or impact. Likewise, with the occupancy here was the revenue per unit for each region. Again, you're seeing the same general downtrend. So, guys, anything else about the regions we want to mention?
Just to put the corollary there from that in the previous slide where we saw the rates somewhat the daily rates holding, we saw that inventory had grown, and then we also saw that occupancy was down. And so the correlation there is that for the most part, what caused the reduction in occupancy was the influx of new inventory. We were able to sustain rates during that period, and that's really what most property managers still reported a good year revenue wise because rates were up.
Yes, I think at first at mid-year when we were looking some things, I was one of the ones that was starting to feel a little bit like, maybe there's an ADR issue, that the rates are just pushed a little too aggressively. And as more and more of the inventory has really come into play, it's realizing, no, that's what people are still willing to pay. It's just a lot more supply than the demand, and that's what's hurt the occupancy.
They're
So
expecting more for their money right
yeah,
now than they maybe did 2 years ago.
yeah, and don't steal your thunder from down the road. That's part of what we get into. So now I wanted to just take a couple of markets and look specifically at them. So I think it was like 51% of it when it popped up here was in the Southeast. So I picked correctly in picking the ones I thought would show up here the most. You can see specifically in the Southeast that the average daily rate, again, the orange line, seemed to stay pretty true. They did get a little more aggressive in the summer with that. The interesting thing I see here is while they did have that drop in occupancy, right about the mid-year, that difference from like July on, it really starts to tighten up till almost up through November and December, where December is really almost a match, and October and November are closing into the closest it's been all year. And it's interesting, if you look at what their rates did, their rates went slightly less than last year in those last few months. So a lot of things that could have been an intentional thing by people. It could have been intentional by way of using revenue management. That could have been a strategy from the previous year that they just said, let's lower those rates a little bit more from feedback and performance of the previous year. It doesn't mean simply that they lowered rates and got more occupancy. You still have to evaluate how did you do revenue and everything on those at the end of the day. But it was just an interesting trend, and I think it was positive the standpoint of a lot of people, other than maybe doing a little bit of discounting at the last minute, a lot of people usually hesitant to ever back down on the ADR. And if there was some intentional efforts here early on, it may have had some success, and it's worth evaluating, was there some success for you personally in that. The last region we were going to look at here, there was the revenue per unit for Southeast. And again, you can see the same kind of trend where they were behind the previous year. They did tighten up a lot more towards the end of the year. So we also ran the same thing for the mountain. Just we wanted to get kind of an opposite market. So much more of a ski type market versus like a beach summertime market. You can see, a little bit of difference here. The mountain market seemed to, follow a little bit lower than the previous year on the average daily rate. And their occupancy seemed to stay a lot closer to the previous year, with that slight decrease of the rate all year long. That's also an interesting kind of evaluation as how successful was that. Something that you can look at with your data and say, well, maybe I was down a little bit in my rate, but it offset my occupancy enough that I actually made more money. Those are the kind of things that you're going to look at. Don't get hung up on one number. I think, Amber, you said it earlier that in some of the discussions with people in the mountain clients, didn't they kind of see some of the things that were happening in the previous season with the Southeast and reacted early to say some of this?
Yeah, I think there was a lot more because the high season in the mountains is often in the fourth quarter. And so they were able to make those adjustments to not necessarily raise the ADR like they normally would, because learning from the Southeast. The other thing I would say is the mountains didn't have as much of an inventory increase, just because you can only build so many more houses up in the mountains. So this is a little bit more reflective of markets that maybe didn't get a ton of new inventory over the last 3 years.
Amber, I'd also like to note that most new inventory really isn't coming from new construction either. It's coming from investors and people who are deciding to put their properties into short term because they're seeing a better return than long-term rentals.
Yes, and I think that's definitely something we're going to see this year. How are those investors going to change their approach based on these factors?
And that, yeah, so with the mountain, and I think, even like with what Scott was saying about the return, I mean, it was pretty close to the previous year here for their performance. So they seem to have hit some of the right switches to at least protect that. Obviously, inventory was a factor and some other things with that. So we did only pick those 2 regions. So if you're one of the other regions, I apologize. We will mix it up in future webinars. So to kind of sum up 2023, we really wanted to hit, the main takeaways was occupancy was down everywhere. You saw it down. It varied based off season and market, but it was down. ADR tended to stay the same with a few fluctuations. Your RevPAR was down, but all that was impacted because of the inventory. The influx of inventory from all the things we mentioned really messed with that occupancy and revenue stats. Like we said, with an assessment, I've seen a lot of PMs that were plus or minus 5% of the previous year. They made the same money in 23 as they did in 22. If you look at their booking, their occupancy, you're like, well, their occupancy was way down, or their ADR wasn't up that much. It was either adding the right mix of inventory or filling the right weeks with, shoulder weeks and stuff like that. So we'll hit a little bit of that in the strategy coming up a little bit down the path here in the webinar. We ultimately did see the same booking activity. It was just that inventory that impacted it. So rolling into 2024, this slide was super exciting when we were putting this together because it actually represented a shift. I was excited and called everybody on the team and said, hey guys, I get to flip the arrow. Our occupancy had been down. I'm now, we were now kind of like, look, we can make this, it's flat, not just because we're holding last year. We're actually seeing a little bit. Now this is, and I should preface this graph is 2024 versus 2023 year to date. So how are we doing on 2023 bookings at this point last year compared to how we're doing for 2024 right now? So, average daily rate is still pretty much holding the same. But when we get into that spring and into the summer, we're seeing occupancy up where we were last year. That's a positive sign. If we haven't, I don't know if that's inventory pulling out of the market specifically, or if that's more people are coming back, or other efforts are working to pull in guests that, had gone away from stuff and then now they've done something else and they're coming back to vacation rentals. What exactly is driving that? That's obviously going to be independent to each company. But this was a very exciting, positive thing that doesn't mean, run to the bank and say things are going to be up 3%, but it's a positive sign in the right direction of where we want to go. The same thing looking at the regional like we did before. This is just, we're looking at just occupancy and average daily rate for 2024. You can see some of the markets. You can see a little bit of the Southeast there. It was kind of notable. It stood out that the Pacific was down where it was last year for occupancy. Part of the Pacific is Hawaii. That could be a little bit of a factor there. You've got the Northeast seemed to be a little bit varying different here. Nothing stood out as major, but you can see where each market is going or each region's going. Likewise, in the average daily rate, those felt like they were pretty much on par with that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Nothing really stood out a lot different there. We pulled up the Southeast again, focusing on that. You can see their rates are staying pretty much the same. Looks like maybe the Southeast is getting a little bit aggressive in the June and July and trying to push up their average daily rate a little bit, but their occupancy, they're beating their previous year occupancy through July. So that's a very positive thing for the Southeast to look at and say, are things coming back? Are people just booking earlier? Time will tell, but it's a positive progression. And then the mountain, looking at that with the same thing there is you can see, it felt to me like maybe they were trying to hit a little more, I hesitate to call it shoulder seasons, but that, you're kind of getting out of winter and you've got that late summer season that maybe they were getting a little more aggressive with rates there. Their occupancy seems to be holding well throughout the whole thing. So there seems to be some, strategy going on in some of that market. That was the glimpse at 2024 data that we have. Scott, Amber, anything to throw into those before we kind of move into some of the forecasting and trends? strategies?
I would really say everybody's much more alert. Like I think the Q1 of 2023 caught people off guard because it started off pretty well and then it just went sideways a little bit, the demand, just because there was so much more competition for a finite number of guests, right? And so we're seeing people really start to pay attention to that. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this is adjusting over time.
All right. And so now I'm going to send it back over to Amber and Scott to talk a little bit more about some of the forecasting and strategies.
So really, what we're looking at here is these are factors that we're going to want to pay attention to in every market, right? Occupancy is going to continue to have competition from hotels, international travel, cruises, all of that. These factors are going to affect you differently where you are. But, one of the things I've seen, and I'm sure Scott has seen, since the beginning of since I've been in the industry for, since probably 2008, most markets have always had more demand than supply. So if you got a property, you could book it no matter what. And there's been very few markets where there was more supply than demand. And so we're really used to how do you get more guests? How do you get more guests? And those have been our conversations, right? And now we have to kind of shift that to what are the properties that guests want to book? How do I make my properties more attractive to the guests that are in this market? So this occupancy trend, it's going to continue. It's not shifting a lot from last year, but how we respond to it is going to impact our bookings and our revenue. So those subpar properties, they're going to see a huge drop in occupancy. Those great properties are going to keep booking well. And that's when we get into that profile of what do your portfolios look like? And that's going to, I really think that's going to be the biggest impact on everybody this year. Are you intentional about what your properties look like? Do you know how to book them? Do you know how to make them attractive to the people who are looking for that? So the other thing that I've seen is that we've all as an industry just been so like we said 2020, like everything dropped in March of 2020, like everything disappeared. We didn't know what happened. And then we were busier than we've ever been. And so there was no real time to plan. Like we were taking orders literally and keeping properties clean. And we have to go back to planning. We have to plan, right? We have to have a well thought out strategy. We have to have marketing. We have to have a budget. We have to make sure that all of those things line up for a successful business. And I really do think that this is going to make the difference for a lot of businesses this year. So if you don't have a plan this year, get a plan. If there's nothing else you take away, like get a plan, write it down, make sure the math adds up.
So as we looked at this, there are businesses that just mimic the economy and trends around them, and then there are others that look at it and say, how do I take advantage of this situation? And we feel there are a lot of things that sharp property managers can do, that even if we're looking at what we anticipate being a relatively flat year coming up, there's still ways to thrive in that environment. And Amber, as you were talking about inventory, we haven't really picked a place to mention but we do see some things slowing the growth of inventory, certain factors out there from the economy. A lot of the mortgages that people have on their second homes are variable rate, and they were purchased when rates were low. Those rates are resetting now, and it's going to be more expensive for those owners to keep the properties. We think some of those will come back on the market. We expecting, and the Fed is also projecting more foreclosures this year, and we're seeing some trend in the multifamily housing area where they converted some of their inventory to short term. They're finding it wasn't the gold mine that they thought it was, and they're going back to long-term rentals.
And that's why we had inventory, and a lot of the stats we went through above and showing how the inventory really affected that. That was one of the biggest variants that really messed with a lot of the other numbers that was really somewhat outside of your control, as a property manager. And I think with what Scott's alluding to, that help may be coming to help pull that back into a little bit of control. But it's something outside with these other factors, like you said, watching that, knowing something that's out of your control, but being aware of it. You need to do that as a company.
So now we're talking about trends. Now let's go into strategies a little bit. Like, great, these things are happening. What can we do about it, right? Where should we be looking? What are the questions we should be asking to move forward with our business, right? So really, when we started to look at this, we said, 2024 boils down to these four essential questions, right? As far as your portfolio, do your properties capture guest demand in your market? Do they capture it well? How do they capture? What could you do to capture them better, right? Are your properties attractive to the guests who are looking for them? Now that you have that, are you maximizing the revenue of those properties? Are you making sure that you're adding the value and the services that guests are willing to pay for at a price that they're willing to buy? And do your properties look as good as they possibly can where guests are looking for them, right? The answer to that is huge, and it changes for everybody. But at the end of the day, those are the questions. Now, on the next piece of this, and this is really a game changer for people, and this is one of the things, again, we kind of dropped the ball on from 2020 to 2022. And you want to make sure, do guests know why they should book with you instead of someone else? Once they book with you, because OTAs are the most efficient source of a new customer acquisition. Once you have a customer, do they know to come stay with you every time they come to your market? That's the difference in those shoulder seasons, those off-peak seasons, of the companies that do perform really well in off-peak times and the companies who drop occupancy during those times. So make sure you have a good remarketing strategy, capturing existing guests, making sure you're remarketing to those existing guests and that they know who you are and why they should book with you instead of someone else. And then on the next side of that, are you and your community prepared for potential regulations? Have you built those relationships in your community? Are you aware of what could be coming down the pipeline? Because it's a game changer for your business. And be aware, if it hasn't hit you yet, it will. It's a matter of time. So then we go
So,
into
Amber, just to tag on to the advocacy thing, obviously I come to that with a huge bias, but the fact of the matter is, of all the factors out there that we look at, whether it's their economic factors or whether they're those black swan events like hurricanes or something, or a pandemic, nothing out there right now has a greater potential of impacting your business than regulation. Regulation can put you out of business almost overnight if you're not on top of it. And when you I know so many property managers, and I know how hard everyone works in building value, and they're building up a company, a family business, a legacy for themselves. And I think about that and think, people have put decades in some cases into building their business, and overnight the value they built for that could be cut in half simply because half their inventory is no longer rentable. And the common denominator that I find is that when these regulations are proposed in a community, we're almost never prepared. We are always fighting these battles from behind because we don't get engaged early on. And that's what Amber was alluding to, is building those relationships now, being a good community member, being a good citizen, go to your town council meetings, and more importantly, be the authority about short-term rentals in your community. So when there's questions that come up, the officials in your town and county have someone to come to. A good friend of mine always says, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And we need to make sure, everyone needs to make sure that advocacy is part of their business plan, that they're engaged in it and invested in it with their personal time, money, and resources.
Mhm. And I would say the more success and awareness we have as an industry, the more visibility we are going to have, and the more that short-term rentals are going to be targeted for additional advocacy in all sorts of different ways. So it is time for us to all come together and really understand we're all part of the same industry. We all have to work together on this. And it's going to be a big deal. The hotels have done it
And,
already.
and
They're
it's
all
something that
aligned. Yeah.
even if it's not hitting you, you be prepared, know what's going on in the next town over, the next city over, one of your, somebody else you talk to, being ready. And, I went ahead and switched ahead to our slide that we talked about some of this because this was just, what we had set to do anyway. Being engaged at letting them know, hey, and this is somewhat like what we can help you with, like with from an LSI standpoint, insights and stuff, or you just with your own company. What do we do for this community? How much money are we bringing in? How many people are we employing? Have that data, be out there with that now so you can be proactive and not reactive. I think that's a lot of what we're all trying to preach here is take these things, great tips here that we have, engage it now, make this part of your business process, plan to make this part of your process, as Amber said, plan for this. Don't wait and say, oh my gosh, they're going to do this all of a sudden. Because if it's not happening now, it's going to come up at some point.
Yeah, and really it's just about being proactive before
Yeah.
and proactive and informed. The fact is that I think as an industry, we all want to be good citizens. We all want to be professionals. We all want to be a part of our community. We don't want to be perceived as a nuisance in a town because of noise. But we need to be prepared when these questions come up, because oftentimes the complaints are exaggerated, number one, and we don't tell our story well. We don't tell how much we add to the economy of a town or a county, and we let others control the narrative. One of the narratives right now is that short-term rentals impact affordable housing, and so a lot of the regulation that's being proposed out there is spurred by that. They think if they cut out the short-term rentals, there'll be more affordable housing. And truly, there is no connectivity to that at all. We've commissioned affordable housing studies, and the fact is that most short-term rentals don't fit a definition of affordable housing. They would be too expensive. They're not available a full year because the owners want private use out of them as well. And so we can't allow ourselves to be the scapegoats for what really are important issues and are issues that all communities need to address, like affordable housing. We want to be part of the solution, but we don't want to be the blame.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think we've got on here, those are all, I mean, that's exactly why Scott is here. If you're not aware, he's your guy. We actually put his email in here. He's the one that you can bug. But if you've got questions, if some of you weren't sure where to start or anything else, he's the guy to start with and just say, we have this going on. If you've got a situation, he's probably seen it or heard of it in other situations that can help. All right, Amber, I'm going to back up to our
Okay, great.
portfolio.
All right,
And
portfolio,
you
unit market fit, right? And this is the thing that we want to look at, or the couple of things, we've talked about this a little bit in this call already. Are your properties the right properties to get booked? Can you clearly articulate, this is the type of property that books well, right? I need a log cabin with 2 master suites on the main floor and a hot tub. Like that's the ideal for my market, right? And of course, that's an ideal. And everything else is kind of a variation off of what books the best in your market. So you understand how closely do the properties you have, the properties you can potentially acquire, have meet the market demand that exists. And this is so much more important now than it's ever been in these markets where supply is exceeding demand, right? And you really want to look at these markets. I think Phoenix is a great market where they've always had more supply than demand. Sun Valley is a market, Orlando is a market. There's just a lot more demand. or excuse me, a lot more houses than people to book those houses. So talk to people in those markets, especially see what they've been doing to adjust their approach. But having that right unit market fit is like the number one thing to do, right? Can you speak to that? Can you identify that? Can your team do that as you're going through and growing your portfolio, right? Those are the big pieces. And then focus on those top performers. You're going to have these tier 2 properties that you brought on in the rush of time when you could just take anything, right? And they're just not performing well. And you're going to see the biggest drops in these tier 2 units. Identify which ones you can upgrade, right? Identify which ones are probably going to leave your portfolio, and kind of try to set expectations proactively with homeowners on these. Hey, this is going to be a tough year for you because this is what the ideal property is in this market, and this is what's capturing demand. And your property's not, it needs some things. And if you're not willing to do it, you're going to see a revenue drop. It's better to have those conversations early rather than after the fact. It gives you legitimacy. It gives you credibility if you're telling them before it happens. And then when it happens and they're ready to make those changes to improve their property, they're going to come to you for that. And you can sort through that. But just make sure you keep your great properties. Make sure you're setting good expectations with those and focus on those good ones, rather than getting distracted by your tier 2 properties. The other thing I think Tim was talking about too, this quality versus quantity issue. You
Yeah.
want to make sure you know where you stand on that. Do you
There's
have,
not a right answer on that,
yeah, there's
but
not. Some people,
you have to be who you are, you know.
mhm,
I think, and that may apply a little bit to to piggyback on what Amber said, but like the don't let inventory growth impact your unit performance. You've got to protect your owners that you have. Don't just add revenue or add inventory and say, oh, well, that's how I'll grow.
mhm.
Because if you don't have your other things that we're talking about here, like revenue management and planning and marketing and everything else, all you're going to do is move your guest from one homeowner to another homeowner, and then you're going to have homeowners get upset and want to leave. You need to have the whole plan when you're going at that a growth approach. Growing is good. Adding inventory is good. Make sure you're doing the other pieces with it.
Yeah. And, we go with this and the next things we go into, you are the market expert, right? When you're in the market, you know your market better than anybody else does, better than we do. We understand the industry. We understand what the big trends are, what people are experiencing. And ideally, you can talk to industry experts to find out what are solutions to problems you're having in your market. So you know the tools that are in your toolbox to be able to best solve for your issues or your concerns to build a successful business.
There are 2 points that we want you to take away or consider under this revenue category. And I'm going to talk about the ancillary revenue streams. Amber is going to talk about revenue management systems. But when, as I said earlier, one of our objectives for this webinar is to talk about things that help our property managers thrive during either an uncertain time or when we see kind of a flat period in the economy and with sales. And this is really the time to review your ancillary revenue streams and to tweak those things, because I call this the product mix for a property manager. In other words, our product just isn't the homes and properties that we rent. It's also the other products that we add into the mix that we're either marketing to the guests or to the homeowners. And so revenue streams like travel insurance, security deposit waivers, your linen program, other fee structures you have, such as cleaning, early check-in, late checkout. There's excursions, rental gear. This is really the time to focus on that, because that's non-shared revenue with the owner. So it's the most cherished revenue you can get. If you're looking to increase your revenue by $20 and your your commission rate is $20. You have to raise the rent by $100 to get $20. But if you can pick up that $20 in these ancillary revenue streams that are not shared with the owner, that's retained revenue for you. So focusing on those retained non-shared revenue streams are all important. And then the other element of this is also important is anything that gives you a competitive edge, whether it's your marketing, whether it's how you market to your past guests. I wouldn't look at anybody trying to sell me a service unless they told me how it was going to put money on the table for me. And that's the way I think you guys should, everybody listening to this webinar should be viewing things, because those ancillary revenue streams are probably the most ignored aspect of the property managers and their businesses that I engage with. Those are all important during these flatter periods.
And some of those services may be things you're already doing, but look at how you're doing them. Are you marketing your travel insurance the effective way?
Yeah,
Are you, early check-ins are a great one, because you can do that and it doesn't cost you a cent. All you have to do is prioritize your list of how you do things. And these are premium things that you may be doing, or say, I don't know if we can do this. There are ways to do this. You can, talk to your property management system, see how they do it. There's other solutions out there. There are ways to add in revenue. And like Scott said, that is essential. In addition to just your commission, it can be half of what you make off of a reservation.
One of the things that I have in here that I've never said before, using a revenue management software of some type is now a requirement for a successful short-term rental business. I've never said that before, but I really, in the last year, I've looked at managers who are insistent at not using software but are really on top of it and are really analytical and using Excel, and they've got a big portfolio and they're doing well and they're outperforming the market because they're paying attention to it. They are not doing as well as the same person with a revenue management software. There's a lot of different solutions out there. There's a lot of different needs out there. You've got to make sure that you have the tool that fits for you, but having a revenue management system of some sort to automate your pricing, to set in those parameters, to adjust, really is a requirement now. It's not optional to compete, really optimize a property.
Amber, and the other half of that equation, as we talked about this, is that you have to have a good revenue manager as part of your staff, somebody who really understands that process and those dynamics, because you can have the tool, but if you don't understand it, you're going to make the wrong decisions.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be like part of your staff. Like I honestly, I really think for most managers, a outside consultant or contractor, somebody who's part-time or just comes in for a few hours to help you like ramp up, to get you on board is almost more effective than trying to hire somebody. Hiring a full-time revenue manager right off the bat without having a revenue management system or without having the tools and the knowledge, that's a big jump. And I think may not always be as successful as bringing in an expert, and really check to make sure your expert is an expert. Anybody can call themselves a revenue manager. What are they? What's their background? What's their experience? So understand that, do your research when you go and you find somebody to consult with you on what's best for your business. And again, the market, they know the industry, make sure that matches up well, and build your own unique revenue management program with a software as a foundation.
Yeah,
And
and Amber,
I'll say I agree with both Amber and Scott on this. I mean, I've sat in a seat as, with a property management company with a large corporation that didn't have revenue management, an identified person for that, and really lived on Excel spreadsheets. And, I feel like there's a lot of money that can be left on the table if you don't have somebody specifically focused on revenue management. I do think that whether you hire someone in-house or like Amber was suggesting, or even bringing on a company like RevMax, I can see just a return on investment for it being paid for in itself. just by implementing it alone to help with occupancy. So I'll say this is definitely something that, like, if anybody's on this call and doesn't have a revenue manager that is focused on that, then that should be one of the things that's on your to-do list for 2024, like, period.
Yeah, and just to clarify that, because we've got a question in here, revenue management software would be a software that helps you adjust your rates in real time based on your parameters that you've set for daily rates. Your rates should be adjusting for midweek and weekdays. The day that you should have, one of the parameters I have, and this is I don't want to get into it too far in detail, but your rate should be adjusted on a regular basis. You should be setting the daily rates, just as the market adjusts. So please just make that's what we're talking about. Do your rates adjust based on the changes in the market? Are you
Market and everything else.
Yes.
Yeah, I really like, where possible, having the in-house revenue manager. It isn't always possible, but you're going to know your market better than anyone else. And the challenge of any revenue management system is to really organize the comps in a way that makes sense, and you're actually grouping comparable properties into the right subsets, so as they recommend pricings, and you'll know them better. I would also say, in kind of a second plug about RevMax, is the only revenue management system that I'm aware of that has a boot camp and a formal training program for revenue managers. And so if you're hesitant to get into it for that reason, take a look at that, because that's your shortcut, is RevMax boot camp.
And then, yeah, just real quick to wrap this up, marketing. This is going to make the difference between the people who are who are just kind of coasting along, and the people who are going to outperform the market in the next year. Do guests know why they should book with you instead of someone else? Once they book with you once, do they know to come back to you? When they think about your market, when they think about visiting your market, are they coming to you? What does their experience look like going to your OTAs, going to your website, looking at all of this? Can you articulate your value proposition? And just kind of what worked 2-3 years ago is not going to work this year, and just kind of keep an eye on that. What OTAs are expecting of an optimized listing has changed. So check with those OTAs, check with the marketing expert to get that up to date. Look at your properties, do a listing audit of all your properties, what needs to be improved. If you need new photos, you need to rearrange, you need to update your copy. Did a property get a new amenity? Make sure those are targeted. Make sure you know which amenities and OTA values. And then also just know, like, if you had an OTA strategy 3 years ago and you said no to an OTA, you probably need to reassess that at this point. And you want to make sure, like, if you need that OTA in the future to book your properties, it's going to take time for those listings to ramp up with reviews and everything else. So add OTAs before you think you need them, I think, is one of the things that I would say. So look at this. It's a ton of information. I have to say, this is something I know about. I know what it needs to look like, but how to do it, I want to thank Bluetent for helping me get this slide together on what we need. But it's hard to be an expert in all of these different things. Acquiring homeowners, retaining homeowners, building homeowners, dealing with operations, dealing with marketing. It's impossible to be an expert in all of these. So reach out, ask for help, figure out what tools are available for you. You should know all the tools that are available so you could decide which ones are best for you.
Just if anybody's interested about seeing your own data, LSI Insights is a tool we have that lets you see your data, and it gets more narrow than your region. You can see your specific market. If you're not using it, you can reach out there to the marketing and habitiq.com, and they will pass that along and you can get you set up. It's a little bit different integration depending on your property management system. But inside of there, you can, like I said, for free, you can start comparing your stuff in the market. All you have to do is sign up and start putting your data in it. There are some advanced features in there that tie into the marketing and more analytics against your units and stuff that there, but I'm not pushing that right now. And if you are using Insights and you want to know more about tracking this stuff, there's a webinar coming at the end of February, and there's a QR code right there that you can register and get signed up for that. So that one, our support team puts on a great webinar. It's really a basics with, I think this one's supposed to be how LSI works. So it's starting from the ground up. So if you've never used it, or if you're new and you've heard about it and you want to get in and understand it, that's a great one to be in on.
Yeah, I was a LSI client for years. I understand how easy their tools are for property management. I come from property management on the coast of North Carolina. And so, when you are trying to figure out, how are you doing compared to everyone else in your market? Am I doing well? Should I be doing better? And then specifically looking at your competition, that the data right there is just for any property manager invaluable. So, and then I'm going to kind of tie that back in. So these were some of the things that we, came up with. Okay, you guys just sat in through a flood of information and data throughout the industry over last year. We talked a little bit about, 2 years prior, where we've got just a sneak peek of 2024 as the data that they have and presented on the first 2 weeks of the year. But what are some actionable things that you can take this information and actually work towards some growth for 2024? So these were some things that, the group collectively discussed about, if there was something, if you could put a few things on your to-do list for this year to take action on and then be able to boost revenue. So, we'll start with marketing programs because we just, Amber just talked about that, and Tim as well, where in the past, the past year around COVID era, you didn't really have to market. People were eager to get out of their homes that they had been just stuck in for months and ready to vacation, or, taking their family and working remotely and living, in a vacation rental property. So marketing programs that for growing direct bookings. We all know that yes, OTAs can be a bit of a beast and a necessary evil at times. People think of them as that, but we really think that that's an opening to a door of a new guest, a new traveler that might not have booked with you directly initially. But the part that comes into play for you is, how do you take that guest that did come in through an OTA and convert them as a direct booking guest? And those are marketing initiatives that you need to focus on in 2024 to ensure that you are taking more of that revenue in-house without paying those additional commissions on it and having them booked directly for you. So marketing programs, on the fly of email marketing initiatives are very low cost marketing initiatives that you can put into place fairly quickly. If you feel like you don't have a person that can actually help you do that, we've got team members that we work with through Bluetent. Amber just talked about Bluetent and Q4 launch that are available to kind of spin up some of those fast marketing approaches for you that don't take a lot of legwork for you guys to create. And email marketing is one of those heavy hitters. And then what Amber was speaking about too, beating your competitors on OTAs and win those bookings, making sure your photos are the best looking photos out there in the flood of properties that they start shopping with, making sure your descriptions are compelling, your reviews that people are leaving you are positive. So on that end, it's not all marketing that falls into your operations team to make sure that every guest that comes in has a good experience, to make sure that your reviews are positive, so that when people do shop, one, you might be up against another property. And if your reviews are stellar in comparison to theirs, they're probably going to feel like it's not as much of a gamble booking with you. And then one of the biggest questions that we had coming in, we've got a lot of open Q&As, is revenue management and solutions to boost occupancy. I know everybody on this call has had a lot of time with that, but finding either a solution for your company to have someone in-house looking and overseeing your opportunities for revenue management, whether you're outsourcing that or bringing in a software solution that can do that for you. We've had a lot of people commenting on here about how much they love RevMax. Been a RevMax client. I mean, they've got some systems that can automate some of this for you that doesn't take as much manpower that you have had to use in the past to try to manage your revenue management. And then we've got Jonathan that's been on our Q&A for the webinar, who is been just asking us questions about payment options to attract new travelers. You know, there's some payment options that are available where some property managers are offering like mobile wallet that's available. So it's a payment system that they're used to when they're shopping on like with Apple Pay and things like that. I mean, and now it's available for vacation rentals when they're booking their next beach house or ski cabin. Like, so those type of options available that our team from Lynbrook are offering up is a great opportunity for you kind of to open up to those new generations of travelers that, you know, are very different from the people that you are accustomed booking your properties with, that are looking for new offerings, really focused on experiences. So that's a fun thing for you guys to kind of think about, like, what can I offer my guests next? And it's a different payment system for them to make that process much faster. I will say Scott Leggett taught me so much years ago when he talks about like ancillary fees and upsells. I mean, I think Scott could have his own spotlight for a whole webinar talking about revenue generation through
That should have been a
upsells.
poll question. How many people have attended a Scott and George revenue session at Verma?
But really, like, I'd like to, you know, let Scott speak on this one a bit, but like simple revenue growth when it comes to upsell opportunities, but also with travel insurance. I mean, like selling and offering travel insurance coverage that not only protects your guests, but there's coverages that also protect your homeowners, and you creating revenue through a commission off of that. I mean, that revenue stream can be really impactful to your bottom line when you're looking at what type of growth you've got in 20 and 24 and how you can produce more revenue for your company. And it can be as subtle as a travel insurance upsell. And the team over at Rental Guardian has been incredible with that. I've like just, you know, met with John Slaughter and Brady and their team of just like discussing those options and how easy it is for some of their clients to be able to offer that. But that was another one of our actionable growth strategies that we thought you needed to have on your radar for 2024. And then probably the biggest topic of discussion, questions that we get and see quite often is homeowner acquisition. I mean, it is cutthroat out there when it comes to property management companies going up to bat to get new homeowners. And I know Amber talked about, she said about one thing is to retain your existing homeowner, and then second is to bring on new homeowners and fresh blood into your property portfolio and providing new properties for guests and really opening up just your market share. And so if a homeowner acquisition technique is not already listed as an actionable thing for you for 2024, it's a must. So whether it's a CRM tool for you to track your communication that you have with these homeowners and make sure that you're not leaving someone without an email or a call being answered, and really just being active and communicating with them. I mean, that a CRM tool for you is a must. And then secondly is like, how are you touching these homeowners? How are you reaching them? What marketing initiatives are you doing to sell your company, sell your staff, sell your team members, sell the experience that you're providing for these homeowners? So these were like 6 big things that we felt that if they weren't on your 2024 growth strategy by now, they should be. And we're happy to help anybody with any of these questions. Any questions that have come in through the webinar that we've not been able to answer live, just for time's sake. If you've got a question, we'll leave it open for just a few more minutes. I know we're over on time, but this was an amazing webinar. I cannot thank Scott, Tim, and Amanda more for their time in putting this together. They worked really hard in pulling all of this data and preparing this presentation for you today. It has been amazing. I appreciate all of you. If there is anybody on here who has a question that we you haven't asked yet, pop it in the Q&A. We'll make sure we reach out to everyone individually and make sure your questions have been answered. And then Tim, can you take them to that last slide? Just so they have the email address handy, should they have anything
Yeah.
that they need.
I think there was one question. Somebody asked something about seeing the LSI market. I will address that. As everybody, you'll see where the markets are that your units are. Inside of LSI, we actually had from the very beginning, we said our rule was everyone belongs to a market. So I know sometimes people go to different things and they're like, oh, well, we don't have anything for your market. Our rule was you're in a market. Now, sometimes that market might be your entire state or an entire group of states, but at least you have something relatively comparable that you can compare to. And then you can filter that down. So you might be in an area like, the Outer Banks, North Carolina, but you could actually start filtering that down by city or by unit, unit size or anything else. So you can try to normalize your stats to your competition, and it is anonymous with what the rest of the market is. But so everybody's in a market, you'll see whatever markets you have units in. So if with my Outer Banks example, if your units are in the Outer Banks, you'll see that market. If you happen to have units in the Outer Banks and, Hilton Head, you would see both of those markets. I don't know if anybody has a case like that, but if your units go into a couple different markets in that same system, you would see all those markets.